Economic Democracy by Major C. H. Douglas. Chapter 6. It will be readily understood that the difficulties which are seen to be inherent in the policy of superproduction are only an extenuation of those with which we were only too familiar prior to the outbreak of war, and it may be contended, and, in fact, it frequently is stated, that even with the unemployment statistics at their minimum point and the nation at its maximum activity in industry, there is still not enough product to go round. Recently, for instance, Professor Bowley has estimated that the total surplus income of the United Kingdom in excess of £160 per annum is only £250 million, which would mean, if distributed to 10 million heads of families, £25 per annum per family, assuming that this distribution did not reduce the production of wealth. The figures themselves have been criticised, but, in any case, the whole argument is completely fallacious because it takes no account whatever of loan credit, which is by far the most important factor in the distribution of production, as we have already seen. What it does show is that the purchasing power of effort is quite insignificant in comparison with its productive power. But it may be advisable to glance at some of the proximate causes operating to reduce the return for effort, and to realize the origin of most of the specific instances. It must be borne in mind that the existing economic system distributes goods and services through the same agency which induces goods and services, i.e., payment for work in progress. In other words, if production stops, distribution stops, and as a consequence, a clear incentive exists to produce useless or superfluous articles in order that useful commodities already existing may be distributed. This perfectly simple reason is the explanation of the increasing necessity of what has come to be called economic sabotage, the colossal waste of effort which goes on in every walk of life quite unobserved by the majority of people because they are so familiar with it. A waste which yet so overtaxed the ingenuity of society to extend it that the climax of war only occurred in the moment when a culminating exhibition of organized sabotage was necessary to preserve the system from spontaneous combustion. The simplest form of this process is that of making work, the elaboration of every action in life so as to involve the maximum quantity and the minimum efficiency in human effort. The much maligned household plumber, who evolves an elaborate organization and etiquette, probably requiring 2 assistants and half a day in order to wipe a damaged water pipe, which could, by methods with which he is perfectly familiar, be satisfactorily repaired by a boy in 1/3 the time. The machinist, insisting on a lengthy apprenticeship to an unskilled process of industry, such as the operation of an automatic machine tool, are simple instances of this. A little higher up the scale of complexity comes the manufacturer, who produces a new model of his particular speciality with the object, express or subconscious, of rendering the old model obsolete before it is worn out. We then begin to touch the immense region of artificial demand created by advertisement, a demand, in many cases, as purely hypnotic in origin as the request of the mesmerized subject for a draught of kerosene. All these are instances which could be multiplied and elaborated to any extent necessary to prove the point. In another class comes the stupendous waste of effort involved in the intricacies of finance and bookkeeping, much of which, although necessary to the competitive system, is quite useless in increasing the amenities of life. There is the burden of armaments and the waste of materials and equipment evolved in them even in peacetime. The ever-growing bureaucracy largely concerned in elaborating safeguards for a radically defective social system, and, finally, but by no means least, the cumulative export of the product of labour, largely and increasingly paid for by the raw material which forms the vehicle for the export of further labour. All these and many other forms of avoidable waste take their rise in the obsession of wealth defined in terms of money, an obsession which even the steady fall in the purchasing power of the unit of currency seems powerless to dispel, which obscures the whole object and meaning of scientific progress, and places the worker and the honest man in a permanently disadvantageous position in comparison with the financier and the rogue. It is probable that the device of money is a necessary device in our present civilization, but the establishment of a stable ratio between the use value of effort and its money value is a problem which demands a very early solution, and must clearly result in the abolition of any incentive to the capitalization of any form of waste. The tawdry ornament, the jerry-built house, the slow and uncomfortable train service, the unwholesome sweetmeat of the direct and logical consummation of an economic system which rewards variety, quite irrespective of quality, and proclaims in the clearest possible manner that it is much better to do your neighbour than to do sound and lasting work. The capitalistic wage system, based on the current methods of finance, so far from offering maximum distribution, is decreasingly capable of meeting any requirement of society fully. Its very existence depends on a constant increase in the variety of product, the stimulation of desire, and in keeping the articles desired in short supply. The provision of cheap electric power. This country is not going to struggle painfully back to the position of 1914. It is not even going back to 1914 without a struggle. In fact, it is going to struggle very hard and, if we are not mistaken, very successfully to see that 1914 marks the end of the time when we took our pessimism ready-made from our bankers. But, of course, the super producer will not like the remedies which will be necessary if this period of our gloom is to be cut short. In the meantime, perhaps it may be expedient to begin an investigation into another aspect of superproduction, with which it will be necessary to deal at some length from time to time: the provision of cheap electric power. The Committee on Coal Conservation, set up by Lord Haldane, presented an excellent report on the subject, the contents of which have already been publicly discussed in some detail. With the technical aspects of the subject, we are not concerned here beyond remarking that it is essentially one of those questions in which the technical design can easily conflict with the requirements of finance, and therefore some economic stability greatly in excess of the existing situation is absolutely essential to the attainment of a suitable design. But some rearrangement will be necessary sooner or later, and a very large amount of plant will be required. Now, electric power is one of the clear avenues to human economic emancipation. By means of it, the work of the community can be reduced, the home made brighter, and the partnership between industry and ugliness finally dissolved. The developments towards the centralization of the control of the electrical manufacturing and supply interests in this country is one, therefore, with which public interest is vitally concerned, since such a combination, if finally consummated and inadequately controlled from without, might easily result in complete public impotence to proceed with any scheme of comprehensive character, except upon terms dictated by the Electrical Trust. The trend of events is indicated by the separate recommendation just put forward by the Joint Committee of the Professional and Consolidated Manufacturing Interests under the titular leadership of the Institute of Electrical Engineers, a diplomatic document, but sufficiently explicit to make it clear that the powerful group of interests represented in its preparation proposed to make a fight for the rich spoils involved. In fact, will become the absolutely dominating factor in the whole industrial and economic life of the country. The matter is one which calls for the most extensive discussion quite outside the technical circles immediately interested, and we propose to follow the situation as it develops.